There are some cases that probably get overlooked because there is just a lack of detail. For whatever reason, there wasn't the glitz and glamour for the media, there wasn't enough twists and turns, and because of that they have fallen by the wayside. There are still real victims in these cases, real people whose lives were forever altered by criminals who at the very least and in that moment were only thinking about themselves. I'm just one insignificant podcaster, but I will do my best to cover some of these cases, get them out there into the public because we can always learn from them, see the red flags, and hopefully avoid a similar fate. Some of these cases will not be like the full episodes because there just isn't enough information to fully flesh them out, but I will share what I've been able to find on this one. June 2nd, 1985. Officer Robert Billington of the Rockford Police Department in Rockford, Illinois, pulls up to his latest call, one involving domestic violence. He contacted the reporting party and, as he spoke with her, a Rita Dar informed him to what had happened in the home. Rita confided in the officer that she and her boyfriend, James Tenner, had been arguing and things were getting heated to the point that she was afraid for her own safety. When asked if he had become physical with her, she stated that no, James hadn't, but she repeated that she was afraid he would soon hurt her because it had happened a lot and, well, he was back on the warpath. She then told Officer Billington of her struggles over the last 4 years since meeting James, 4 years that were full of anger and abuse, and not only mental abuse but physical as well. After hearing the woman's story, there were no charges brought up, but the officer did help Rita get an order of protection, and the paper trail finally began. It hadn't always been that way. The couple had been happy once, but soon the relationship had soured and Rita began to see James for what he was, a man with a bad temper, jealousy issues, and he also let his fists fly sometimes for what felt like no reason. She left him, more than once, but for some reason always went back, and the pair lived together off and on for years and even had 2 children together, creating a bond where there probably should have been none. But hopefully now the law was involved, hopefully he'd either change for the good or finally leave forever. Rita would just have to wait and see. James Tenner had known Albert Sauls and his wife Donna for a while. James and Albert often worked together, hung out with each other, and by the mid-1980s, they each owned and operated their own trucking companies and shared a garage with each other in South Chicago Heights. In the beginning of 1987, James introduced his newest girlfriend to his friends, a woman he had met at a Dunkin' Donuts, a woman named Shirley Garza. James was excited about the new relationship, and his friends were happy for him, and soon the couple were even living with each other, with Shirley moving in with James in April. But James, who had the bad habit of pretending to be nice to his girlfriends before completely changing, did what he always did, and soon Shirley had moved back out before leaving James for good. James was very unhappy about the situation, wanting Shirley back, but she refused, and it made him even angrier to find out that she was actually staying with Albert and Donna, who were now her friends. August 17th, 1987. Shirley Garza was in her car at a stoplight when a man ran up to her, ripped the door open, and jumped inside. It was James. He pulled a knife on her then and almost immediately cut her with it, slashing her once across the arm and once across the stomach. James then commanded Shirley to drive across the street, and he held her hostage in her own car for nearly 8 hours. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., he finally got out of the car and walked away, and Shirley went to the police, but when asked if she wanted to press charges, she refused. James had simply gotten away with it, and despite having gotten away with kidnapping and assault, he was absolutely convinced that nothing in his life was going right. Despite having no proof, he was also convinced Shirley had cheated on him with his friend Albert, and he was also sure, once again despite not having any proof, that Albert and Donna Sauls were plotting against him, and they were the reason why his business was suffering. He was losing everything. James Tenner eventually closed his failing business, and not knowing what to do next, he moved back in with a woman he was still technically married to in nearby Rockford, but he still frequented the area where he used to work, driving by the same garage he used to share with Albert Sauls. James was positive that he was a victim, that everything bad happening could be traced back to one place, to a group of people, back to his old garage and old friends. The more he thought about it, the clearer it all became. They were responsible, it was all their fault, and because of that, they had to pay. Getting a few things together, he made his move. September 2nd, 1987. Albert Sauls and his friend and employee Alvin Smith were at Albert's garage on 3202 South State Street working on Albert's truck. Shortly after they began working on the truck at around 6 p.m., Albert's wife Donna showed up to hang out with her husband as he worked late, and with her was her friend Shirley Garza. The truck was just about buttoned up, so Alvin decided to take off, and he had no sooner left the garage when he saw an old buddy of his, James Tenner, who was holding a shotgun. James raised the weapon, pointing it directly at Alvin, and told Alvin to go back inside the garage. Alvin raised his hands above his head and did what he was told, walking back inside of the building. James followed, and waving the shotgun around, he ordered everyone else inside to lie face down on the ground. Albert, Donna, Alvin, and Shirley all complied immediately, dropping to the floor. James stood over them and told them exactly what he was going to do next. He told them he was going to tie them up, and afterwards he was going to tell them all exactly how he felt about each one of them. James ordered Donna and Shirley to stand up then, and reaching into his pocket, he handed them pieces of rope that he had already pre-tied with a slip knot at either end. He then had the women tie up each of the men with the prepared restraints, with Donna tying up her husband and Shirley tying up Alvin. After they were done, James handed Shirley 2 more pieces of rope and told her to tie up Donna in the same way. He then ordered all 3 to kick their legs, causing the slip knots to get tighter. He left Shirley unbound. James had them all stand up then, and at gunpoint, he walked them over to another part of the building, the part that he used to rent out. They refused at first, but he was insistent, and slowly they all began to shuffle to another garage bay. As they walked, James reiterated that if they complied, if they just listened to him, then he would tell them what he thought about them, then he would let them know how he felt, and then he'd just walk away. Coming around a corner, the terrified group then saw something that somehow made the horrible situation even worse. There were actual nooses hanging from the ceiling. The ropes were at 3 different heights, each corresponding to Albert, Donna, and Alvin. After they were in the nooses, he explained that Shirley had messed everything up, that she wasn't supposed to be there, and that he needed to make another noose, but that would have to wait. He began yelling at the 3 then, screaming about how they had ruined his life, messed everything up, ruined his business, ruined his relationship, ruined everything. James also forced Shirley to get some duct tape and had her place strips over everyone's mouth. Then he continued his tirade. And while he continued to rant, he found some more rope, tied up Shirley, then made another noose before tying it up and placing it around her neck, just like the others. Once again, he yelled at Albert and Donna for breaking up his relationship with Shirley, and when he was done, almost 2 hours later, he asked Shirley herself which one of the group should die first. Shirley refused to answer, refused to talk even, and after a minute, James actually removed the noose, leaving her hands and feet bound before telling her to hop off to the office and wait, admonishing her not to do anything crazy so he didn't have to kill her. And as she was leaving, Shirley heard James say to the others, "I guess this is it." James shot Donna Sauls first, point blank in the face. Her legs instantly went limp and her body fell, and so sudden was the movement that the noose around her throat actually broke her neck. James then pointed the gun at Alvin Smith and shot him in the stomach, and his legs also gave out, drawing the noose tight. Lastly, he turned to Albert, shooting him twice in quick succession. Albert had actually been able to free his hands while James shot his wife and friend and was trying to remove the noose when he was shot in the face and arm. James ran then, taking Shirley with him as a hostage, driving away from the garage where he had shot 3 of his friends. James drove to Chicago's O'Hare Airport, where he then picked up his wife, the one he was currently living with, a woman named Treva Tenner. They started to drive to her home in Rockford, Illinois. As they drove, James informed Shirley that once they were there, he was going to kill her too. The group never made it that far, never made it to Rockford, because an APB had actually been sent out for James Tenner and the car he was driving, and at around midnight the car was stopped and James was arrested. A loaded shotgun was recovered from the front seat, and in the back seat there were multiple boxes of ammunition found as well. But how? How did officers know to be on the lookout for him? What had gone wrong? Albert had lay bleeding on the ground for a while before he found himself able to move. He didn't know how he hadn't been strangled, but eventually he was able to untie himself, and he tried to get up but fell over. Albert tried again to stand, but realizing it just wasn't going to happen, he began to crawl, eventually making it to the garage door where he pushed the button that automatically opened it. Still unable to walk and barely able to see because of the shotgun wound to half his face, he crawled across the street some 250 feet to a residential home, and he was able to yell loud enough to get the residents' attention. Danielle Castine heard shouts for help, and she went outside to see a man bleeding from his face and arm, a noose still tied around his neck, the tail end trailing behind him. She called the police. Responding officers listened to what had happened, took down a description of James Tenner and his car, a station wagon, and the call went out. The car was stopped around midnight near the Northwest Tollway, and all 3 occupants were initially taken into custody. Eventual forensic testing on the gun recovered from James's car showed that it had been the one that had fired the shells found at the murder scene, the firing pin marks being identical. The shells were also of the same brand as the shells found in the car as well. At trial, James tried to plead insanity. His defense team tried to use testimony given by Albert Sauls and Shirley Garza as proof because during their recounting of events to the jury, they had said that James ranted the entire time, sometimes incoherently, for over 2 hours in total. They also said that their client, James, had been hearing voices before the murders, starting in 1981, 6 years before the crime. At one point, the defense called into question James's ability to even understand the proceedings that were going on, though the judge declined to hold a factual hearing on that subject. The state set out to prove that James knew exactly what he was doing, and they started by showing that he had a long criminal history spanning over 20 years, with his first conviction happening in December 1968 when he was found guilty of burglary. He also had a history of violence with many reports of domestic assault, including against Rita Dar, Shirley Garza, and more. Shirley told the jury about James's kidnap and assault on her, and even the officer who took her initial report testified, stating that he had seen the cuts on Shirley shortly after James had made them. It seemed like James just couldn't hold his temper. In mitigation, the defense called 12 witnesses, including 6 members of James's family. All the witnesses claimed that James was a hard worker, a good person, and that he had been an important part of their lives. And Officer Sorrell of the Cook County Department of Corrections also testified, saying that James was a good inmate and that he had done work for her. James also took the stand, telling his side of the story, telling about his relationship with Shirley Garza, how they had met and eventually moved in with each other. He said they had been happy until one day, out of the blue, Shirley had just left for a week without telling him where she was going. When she got back, James said that Shirley had told him that she had been held against her will by Albert and Donna Saul, and they had forced her into having sex with them, something Shirley later told the court never happened. James next testified that after Shirley came back, they lived together for only a few more weeks before Shirley moved out, going back to the people who supposedly had held her hostage. That's when all his problems started, he said. That's when he started to lose everything, including his relationship with his friends and his business as well. Halfway through August, he had had enough and closed up shop before returning to live with his wife in nearby Rockford. James continued his tale then, his sob story, finally getting to the point, the day of the murders, September 2nd, 1987. He said that he was buying coffee at the same Dunkin' Donuts where he had first met Shirley, and he saw Albert and Donna's car driving towards their garage. He said he couldn't see exactly who the driver was, but he did see Shirley in the car, and she was obviously struggling with someone. James followed the car then, though he lost it for a bit before finding it parked outside of Albert's rented garage. James was sure that the pair had kidnapped Shirley yet again, was sure they were hurting her, so he had to rescue her. Quickly, he made up some restraints, the ones found on the victims. He knew they had guns and he was outnumbered, so he had to come up with something. Armed with a shotgun he just happened to conveniently have with him, he took the ropes and started to walk towards the building, and as he approached, he saw Alvin Smith, who was outside shooting a .22 pistol at 6 in the evening in a residential area for target practice. James then claimed that he asked Alvin about Shirley, and Alvin said she was there before inviting the armed man inside. James said as they walked toward the building, he heard gunshots coming from inside because apparently everybody had guns and they were all just shooting them off. At this point in his story, James stopped, then he told the jury that a few weeks before, he had heard that Albert and Donna wanted to kill him, and now he was afraid that they were going to follow through. He had to do something. So he went towards them, going inside the building. The rest of his story matches what Albert and Shirley testified to, at least up to the point where he was ranting and raving about the bound individuals. He claimed at one point he removed the tape from the victims' faces, and they had all threatened him, saying they would kill him for what he was doing, and not only him, but his entire family as well. In fear for his life, he then retaped the tied victims' mouths, and that's when he started shooting the bound and gagged victims in self-defense. Following all the evidence and arguments, the jury deliberated and found James Tenner to be completely sane during the attacks, and because of that, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of armed violence. The state then sought the death penalty. On March 12, 1990, that petition was granted, and James Tenner was sentenced to death. In 1994, James filed an appeal stating that his attorneys were ineffective, stating that they failed to obtain a psychiatric evaluation, one that would prove that James was criminally insane. He was relying heavily on a report by a Dr. Lyle Rossiter Jr., who said that James might have been suffering from a state of mental distress the night of the murder. There was more in the appeal, more legalese, and James tried to paint the picture that he had been wronged, but in the response, the judges stated, quote, "Tenner's arguments are not only unavailing, they are appalling," end quote. They continued. The jury at Tenner's murder trial was presented all of the information which Tenner now presents to this board, and that jury carefully weighed such testimony and evidence before deciding that Tenner was guilty of the murders and attempted murder of his friends, and that there was insufficient mitigation to preclude the imposition of the death penalty. The jury heard Tenner's alleged self-defense defense, but chose to disregard that defense, especially where the evidence proved, and Tenner unquestionably admitted during his testimony at trial, that he led his friends into a garage at gunpoint with no chance for them to run, and then forced them to put their heads into nooses while he yelled at them about their alleged meddling into his relationship with Miss Garza. Clearly, this petitioner is not actually innocent of the crimes he committed, nor has he ever made a claim of actual innocence to any court which has reviewed this case. Moreover, the same jury that heard the petitioner admit that he hung and shot his friends also heard about the way Tenner treated the women in his life, how he physically abused them, contrary to his claim that he did not have a substantial criminal history. The jury also heard 12 people, family and friends, testify in mitigation about what a wonderful, helpful, hardworking, respectful person Tenner was, but that jury chose to disregard such testimony given Tenner's inhuman and abhorrent actions the night of the hangings and murders. No one is denying that Tenner may have been a hard-working, self-made businessman, but that certainly did not stop him from hanging his 3 friends and then trying to kill all of them, and that only by the grace of God, 2 were killed instead of 3. Further, every count which has reviewed this case, both at the state and federal level, has continually rejected Tenner's claims that he was somehow mentally incapacitated at the time of the murders or was incompetent to stand trial, especially where his defense at trial was to claim an unreasonable belief in self-defense and that he was a good, hardworking person, not a mentally incapacitated person. Certainly, any claim which has been rejected by a jury and at least 5 other courts of review should not now become an issue before this board at this time. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, there just isn't much information on this case outside of the available court documents, and there's no information online about if James is still alive or not. If he is, he would still be in prison, serving his sentence, with his only release being his own death. James Tenner's actions that September evening were heinous, and it's almost unbelievable that despite what he did, despite the witness testimony, and despite the premeditation, he tried to claim innocence by means of being insane at the time. There's an alarming amount of people, both past and present, that just can't seem to take responsibility, just can't seem to admit that everything was entirely their fault, only admitting to the bare minimum. James Tenner was one of these people, someone who was never wrong, someone who always had to be right, no matter what he had to do or how far he had to go to prove it. It's a brutal reminder that when it comes to domestic violence situations, they very rarely get better, and for each success story, there's a trail of bodies showing the opposite is usually the case. Things usually only get worse. And that's hard to hear, a hard pill to swallow, because generally we try to look for the good, look for the best in people, but it's important to remember that there are those who will never change, will never be the success story, will only spiral until it's too late. Thank you all for joining me today for another episode of Almost Fiction Plus. I truly appreciate your support, and I thank you for your patronage, because without you, I wouldn't be here, so take pride in your support of the arts and your contribution into my ability to tell the victims' stories, as well as providing warnings about the monsters that are all around us. As always, I'm Chase Ellerman, and thank you for listening to Almost Fiction Plus. Plus.